Hello, this is Stephanie.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to our podcast, The Making and the Remaking of a Codependent Mind.
This week we thought we'd spend some time talking about the Serenity Prayer.
But before we get into that topic, we mentioned last episode that we'd like to do a future episode where we respond to listener questions. And we got a few, so thank you to those listeners who sent us some questions. But if there are others, we'd like to hear from you. You can email us at codependentmind@gmail.com, and you can find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching A Codependent Mind.
So on this topic, I thought it would be fun to explore this Serenity Prayer in detail. This is a prayer that's said at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And like we talked about, I had attended AA on a couple of occasions throughout my life.
Mm-hmm. Is it also said at CODA meetings, Codependent?
Possibly. I mean, it would make sense. I think it's just a 12-step meetings. I think it's common where it's said. And, you can call it a prayer, you can call it a saying, whatever your beliefs are. But before we get into it, I guess I'll say the prayer so everyone knows what we're talking about here.
Yes.
It's very short, it's very to the point, but it's very difficult to actually grasp for a lot of people, I think, and my former self included. So the prayer goes, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Setting aside the God piece, we're going to be focusing on the three things that it expresses a desire for.
Yeah.
The ability to accept, the courage to act, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
Between the things that you need to accept and the things that you need courage to be able to change. Right.
So I think as always, it's useful to think about how my former self, my codependent self, and my, as we said several times, my perceived powerlessness made me behave when it came to these things, right?
I remember you talking about that saying or prayer early on in our relationship. I don't remember how it came up, but it was funny because and I don't exactly remember what you said, but it was something to the effect of being confused by it because you're supposed to accept the things you cannot change and have the courage to change the things you can, but how do you know?
Right. How do you know?
It's as if you really completely forgot about that third part. I was like, well, that's what the wisdom is supposed to do.
Well, and really, I think, that's the part that has to come first. That's at the core of it. And it's not really necessarily finding some difference between things that can or can't change. It's basically just knowing yourself, having self-awareness, and knowing your abilities and knowing what you stand for, what your values are. And because without that, which is what I was severely lacking, then the rest is kind of meaningless. Like, what am I accepting or what am I trying to change?
Yeah. So do you remember, how you received that? If we want to take it as advice or... Yeah,
back in the day, when I was in those meetings and stuff. Yeah, I remember thinking at the time, similar to what I said to you there, which is like, how do I figure that out?
Yeah, how do I become wise?
Right. Yeah, I guess wise is a good word for it. It's just, knowing yourself. And
well, I think knowing yourself absolutely is part of it. But I think wisdom can be understood as applied knowledge and insight. So we all know people who are very intelligent and smart. You are intelligent, but who don't necessarily act that way. Yeah. So they're articulate and they're well read and they do really well in school, but the way that they are in their, as they move through their lives and their social lives and their domestic lives, you just feel like, what's wrong with that person? Seem like they're obviously making choices that seem kind of dumb, and
and the person may even show signs of knowing it to some extent. Almost like just, I know this is a bad idea, but what am I going to do?
So it's as if they have all these intellectual resources, but they can't access them in certain parts of their life. They can't apply them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can also think of people that I know or that I know of who aren't particularly articulate or educated, but do seem wise.
Yeah.
Do seem people whose advice about how to live you'd like to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So they're, whatever intellectual resources they have, they are able to put them to good use.
Yeah,
and
it's not a direct
them.
correlation between intelligence and wisdom. Yeah.
Right. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
And because really, I think a lot of it has to do with reading our emotions correctly, which is the big disconnect that I had. So, because it's that stuff's there. It doesn't take actual book smarts to read your emotions.
Yeah, we talked about how when you were disconnected from your emotions, you were disconnected from a huge source of information about yourself and about the world.
Yeah.
So, not surprisingly, the decisions that you would make in that state were compromised by a lack of information.
Yeah, right.
So even if, again, you were kind of acting intelligently or rationally, there's this huge swath of information that was not taken into account when you chose how to act.
Yeah, and I had all these other kind of maladaptive behaviors that rolled into this package, like the compartmentalization and things like that, where I was constantly... I was going from this place of powerlessness and then making up stories to feel okay with that powerlessness, to feel okay with the fear and the shame that was coming from my bad decisions. And so, yeah, and all the while ignoring my emotions.
And in the episode, I think it was the one about emotional immaturity, I refer to a study of people whose emotional system had been compromised by severe injury, like an injury to the brain, so that only the kind of rational processing was available to them. Their emotional processing was not available to them anymore.
Right.
And if you remember, the theory going into that study was that, well, these people would be great decision makers, right? Because our emotions, all our emotions do is compromise our
they're going to get clouded by their emotions or something.
They're not clouded by their emotions, right? They're just like fewer emotions. And as I talked about it, in fact, exactly the opposite was true. They were terrible decision makers. They didn't even know how to kind of decide where to go for dinner, because again, our emotional system, which takes cues from our whole body, not just from our brain, provides a lot of information about ourselves and about the world.
I think that's essentially what I was doing. I was doing as if I had this injury. I was trying to keep those emotions out because they were unwanted. I was afraid of them. I felt as though that I needed to keep myself safe from them or something. So then I think that this is a good lead into the first piece of it, which I kind of always saw myself as defaulting to being the accept the things I cannot change.
Right.
So, because really, I didn't actually, it's not that I didn't even have I didn't have the courage to change the things I can, but I didn't even know what those were to begin with. So I kind of just by default accepted everything.
Yes. Right. So you didn't have the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
We've established that.
Right. Yeah.
Because you didn't know, you were compartmentalizing, you were suppressing or repressing emotions. You were refusing to read any signals from your emotional life. You were trying to approach everything very rationally.
Yeah, and everything individually, right? So no big picture at all. Like I just, it was too difficult, too scary for me to look at the big picture. So everything that I approached was an individual issue.
So you just decided to classify everything as something that you need to accept.
Yeah, I had to accept. So, but the thing is that I've noticed when I look back on it, I didn't actually accept those things. So really, I was not doing any of this at all. So I acted as if I was accepting it being that, well, I have no choice. I'm powerless. This person likes me, so I have to like them back, or things like that. I mean, that's my job. My job sucks, but oh well. There's nothing I can do about it. I need this job. Things like that.
Yeah, or this person behaves this way, treats me this way, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, what are you going to do? Right. So I would accept it, but really I was not. So, because what I didn't realize also was that I was full of resentment. I was angry all the time. I was sad. I was depressed. So I didn't actually accept these things. That's not acceptance when you're resentful all the time. That's resistance.
That's right. It's ineffective resistance.
Right.
You felt powerless. And like we've said in other episodes, resentment is the anger of the powerless.
Right. And here's the thing, too. I was actually changing things also. So there's my default position was I'm going to accept everything. Then, which is, and like I said, I was not actually accepting those things.
Yeah, that
so
was more a justification or rationalization about why you were not acting.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then
you would default into this powerless position, and then you would post hoc justify it by saying, "Oh, I'm just
right. I'm just being relaxed
I'm just accepting things."
Yes, right. But then so I did change some things. The things I changed were myself in relation to other people, as far as, but not in a healthy way, which we'll get to here, I think. But so someone like, say, R, the person we talked about, that all these insults and like you need to change yourself. So I tried to change those things, right? So I'm changing myself to try to appease people that are abusing me. So
right, or J, freaking out if you moved when you slept. So then you're changing your sleep patterns to fit her. You changed your eating patterns to fit her patterns. You changed basically most aspects of your daily life to accommodate her controlling behavior.
So really, I did actually do a lot of changes. But again, just like the acceptance, which that was not actual acceptance, the change was not actual change, because I didn't, in my core, agree with these things that I was changing. I was doing this only to appease someone that I resented and didn't think deserved me to do these things. But once again, I felt powerless, and I felt like this was the only way to move on, to keep going, to keep myself safe.
So what does it look like now, accepting the things that you cannot change as a healthy or integrated, self-aware person?
Well, so now we have to go back to the beginning, because the beginning being like the wisdom part of it. The wisdom part being, okay, I understand myself better now. So I understand what it is I want to try to accept or try to change. Or so examples would be people in my life, right? So people that I still want to be in my life, but there's things I just don't like about them. Things that I may want them to change, but I can't change those things. I can't. Right. So it's like, so my family being an example, I want them to be part of my life. I have to check in with myself and continue to renegotiate that in my mind, make sure I do still want to be part of their life and them to be part of my life. But there's certain behaviors coming from each of them that I don't really like, but I'm accepting those things because I'm not going to try to change them, and I don't really expect them to change. So I have my expectations around that. So I'm accepting that, basically.
You're accepting that they are the people they are, and then you're deciding whether you want to have a relationship with them.
Yep.
Rather than feeling you have to have a relationship with them, so they either have to change or you have to just be always resentful that they're not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have an example of something you would accept?
Well, I think that's a calculation that I do with a lot of things in my life. And I think if you do it a lot, it becomes more natural and almost automatic.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I'm striving for.
I think you'll find that that's true because, I mean, most relationships in your life are going to be like that.
Yeah.
Like there's not going to be this perfect person. And you have to decide whether the person, whether it's a friendship or a family relationship or a romantic relationship, if there are things about that person that are non-ideal, are those things that you can accept, or are those things that mean that this is not a relationship that is good for you and that you want to be in? And also in the professional space.
Yes,
as well.
Exactly. I was going to say, right. Work. Yep.
I work, jobs every job are far from ideal.
Yeah,
like I've never had an ideal job.
Right. Even no matter how much you love your job or what you do, there's going to be problems. There's going to be people that you don't like to work with. There's all kinds of things that can be wrong.
Yeah, and you have to know what are your options in that situation? And you have, and that's about knowing yourself, but also knowing information about the world in terms of, are there other jobs out there?
Yeah.
Could, in what way might they be better, or what way might they be worse? What is obviously your financial status? What kind of power do you have in that situation?
Yeah, right.
And, that's something actually that I started to think about more when we started talking about resentment and it being kind of the anger of the powerless. And certainly there are some situations in which you can find yourself that you are completely powerless. But I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've been completely powerless.
Yeah.
So when I've started to feel resentment towards maybe people in my life or my job, I have started to do a better job checking myself and say, like, okay, why am I assuming that I have no power in this situation?
Right.
Is there some power that I do have? And how do I access and use that power? And it may just be that I always have the power to determine how I respond.
Yes, exactly. I think
react.
that when it comes to the change, the things I can, the first thing that pops in my head at this point, the healthy version would be, once again, changing myself, but not in the way I was talking about before, where I'm trying to change myself to meet someone else's desires of what they want me to be doing or be like, but changing just my approach. So like with the job example, I regularly do this. We talk about my job on a regular basis, and I kind of use you to help me talk through, like, okay, here's what's going on right now. Help me figure out, is this worth it? Is this still worth it? Here's the annoying stuff, but here's the big picture of my job and what it's doing for me. And
also, are there things that you can do that can make it better?
Yes.
That don't rely on other people.
Yes, exactly.
Changing like assuming that other people are not going to change.
Yeah.
Those conditions not going to change. Are there things that you can do?
So being just reasonable, like your boundaries. So,
Right.
and this is something that I had started doing once I actually started to gain this wisdom, was that because I used to work long hours, I used to stress out unnecessarily about my job as kind of a scapegoat, really, for my overall big picture problems. But once I started gaining this wisdom, I was like, well, do I need to be working 12 hours? No, not really. I mean, if that's the expectation, then maybe this isn't the right job, So I'm going to start cutting it off at 5 o'clock, and because that's what I want. That's what I feel like was reasonable. That's what I want my life to look like. So I did it, and I've been doing it for a couple of years now, cutting it off at 5 o'clock. And everything's been fine.
And there were no professional consequences.
No.
I mean, there could have been.
Yeah, it could
which
have been.
would have been information, as you said, about whether you wanted to continue in that
Sure.
job.
Right.
But you were doing that just assuming that you had to do it.
Yeah, because I would see other people doing it, and I just assumed, I just didn't value myself enough to, or what I brought to the table, that I was just like, this is what other people do. This is probably what's expected of me. So I better work 12 hours.
That's the courage part as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is, right.
The courage to end it at 5. The courage to defend your boundary. And it was nerve-wracking in the beginning.
It was.
For sure. I mean, you would talk about it a lot, and
and weekends and stuff like that too, because I have lots of coworkers that just all weekend long, just emails. By the time Monday morning hits, I have 25 emails because people are they don't stop. But I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that is the main thing here. So if I need to do that, being they expect it, then I need to reassess my relationship to this job. So that's actual change. I think a lot of things are kind of a hybrid, right? Like, it's not like this perfect, here's 2 options. I can or I can't change this one thing. And now, it's like kind of each situation that we come across is going to have kind of a little bit of both, right? So like with the family thing, I'm accepting some of their behavior, but also at the same time, I'm deciding what kind of relationship I want with them. So, okay, well, I'm not going to stress out too much about making sure I call them every week or something like that. I just this is my role. This is what I feel like my role should be in the family.
And again, that takes a certain amount of courage, because that you were not used to defining the relationships that you wanted yourself. It was always responsive to other people's needs or demands. You didn't feel that you could, because of past trauma and abuse, you didn't feel it was safe for you to articulate and act on your own needs and desires.
No boundaries, and just go with the flow.
And it was scary. It was scary to do so.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Again, initially when you started to kind of put up some boundaries with your family in terms of what you were going to respond to, what discussions you were going to get involved with, what expectations you felt were reasonable or not reasonable, that was nerve-wracking for you.
Yeah.
But you did it. And it, again, like work, it was fine.
Yeah, right.
Because these are, as you say, actually people you want in your life. So they responded in a way that people that you want in your life should respond, which is to respect your boundaries.
Yeah, and it actually worked that way. It's like, wow, unbelievable. I'm able to exercise boundaries and just be myself and do what I want, and it's fine.
But it does take courage, because it doesn't always go that way.
No.
Which is true.
No, yeah, absolutely. Like, it very well could have been that work, it's just like, you know what? No, we expect people to go above and beyond. We don't have enough staff. Like, it's just, if you want this job, this is what you got to do. And then it's like, okay, well, I guess I don't want this job.
Or you could do that with people, set a boundary in terms of what time and effort you were willing to put in the relationship, and they could freak out at you.
Yeah.
And get angry.
Yes, right.
And try to guilt you or shame you. I think that happens a lot, especially within family situations where family members will use guilt or shame in order to try and get things from other family members that they feel that they deserve. So it turns out, I think, that the Serenity Prayer is actually pretty good advice about how to live your life. It's just really hard to take up if you're in the kind of emotional and mental distress that you were in when you were actively engaging in codependent behaviors, because you didn't have the self-knowledge, that wisdom, or really an accurate picture of the world. Like we've talked about in other episodes. You didn't have an accurate picture of the relationships that you were in. Everything was distorted by the fear and the shame and the other codependent habits.
Yeah, so it's the complete wrong framework.
So you didn't have that framework. And then it was hard to be courageous when there was so much fear in almost every situation.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And especially when you were in actively abusive or toxic relationships. And so, as you were saying, you kind of like were defaulting to accepting the things you could not change.
As in like physically accepting.
It just gave you an out to not confront these kind of terrifying realities of your life. But even that, you weren't, as you say, weren't really doing it.
Yeah. Right.
You were, in fact, trying to control the situation with, say, these abusive partners by managing their environment and reactions, rather than having the courage to make the change that you needed to make, which was to leave those relationships.
Right. And then also I'm thinking about bad behavior by these people. So I'm accepting their bad behavior, not just towards me, but towards other people. And oftentimes the change that I would do would be to take that on and kind of blame myself sometimes because that was easier to blame myself than to blame the other, because then now I'm kind of forcing myself to feel as though I need to take action if I recognize that this person is behaving badly. So instead it's just like, oh, well, yeah, I just need to do this. And
it's kind of like the trauma bond.
Yeah.
Where the trauma bonding comes in, where you take on the shame and the responsibility rather than having to deal with the more terrifying, powerful person. I do think it comes down to this question of power, of personal power, or personal agency that we've talked about. In kind of every situation where you may be starting to feel resentment, or you have questions as to what's expected of you, or there are demands being placed on you that you're not sure you want to fulfill, is to think about what kind of power do you have in that situation?
Yeah.
Realistically.
Yeah, right.
Enlist others if you have trouble accessing your own sense of personal power, right?
Yeah.
Do you have financial power? Do you have social power? Do you have intellectual resources, emotional resources? Do you have political power? And see what ways those can be exercised to have an outcome that you want.
Or at least make an attempt at that outcome. Yeah.
And when you decide the various ways that the situation might be addressed, then have the courage to do the things that you need to do to get the outcome that you want.
Yeah, and that does take a lot of courage, especially for someone with codependent behaviors. The thought of offending someone, disappointing someone,
angering someone,
yeah, that was really hard for me. Yeah, So I'm sure there were plenty of times where I wanted to change something, but yeah, just that thought just stopped me in my tracks, you know, and then now I got to go do the mental gymnastics
to make it about accepting.
Right.
Make it about acceptance.
Yeah. So it was complicated. The whole process was overcomplicated, and I didn't accomplish anything at all. And now it's actually not that complicated. Like you said, the more I practice this, the more automatic it becomes, because I just know myself and I'm comfortable with my abilities to make these choices.
And the biggest thing that I can think of in terms of acceptance, well, there are a lot of big things. Like, for instance, we're all going to die. We have to accept that.
Yeah, right. Know? Yeah, that's a tough one.
Death and taxes, those are both, we just need to accept those. But other people are things that we cannot change.
No.
We can ask for change.
Yeah.
And we can help them change, but change has to come from within. So, I mean, that's a big thing that has to be accepted, which you said you've done, for instance, with your family. But you don't need to stop there. Yeah. It's not about, oh, they're never going to change, so I just have to accept the treatment, right? Like, so you then have to go further and say, so how do I, given that they can't change, how do I get the outcome that I want that's healthy and positive for me? Yeah. And that could be leaving the relationship, or that could just be deciding to stay and accepting that they're going to be the people that they are.
Yep. And as always, it feels really good to have the healthy approach to these things. And I really like this saying even more than ever. Obviously, I didn't like it before because it was just confusing and made me feel insufficient or something, because it's just like kind of new in my core. I wasn't really doing these things.
Right, and then that causes more shame because
because I know
you're
deep
failing.
Down I'm not. Right. Failing at something super simple.
You know you should be doing something, but you don't know how to do it, and it's scary to do.
But yeah, it actually is pretty simple saying, and it's a good thing to have.
It's
in
simple
mind.
but not easy. Is always the trick, and that's where the wisdom comes in. Is to cultivate, cultivating wisdom, cultivating courage, cultivating true acceptance.
Actual acceptance,
authentic acceptance, not an acceptance that comes from this sense of powerlessness in your life, but a authentic expression of the power you do have and understanding the power that you don't have.
Yeah, and you're making a choice. This is all intentional. So these acceptances that you're doing I'm making the choice to do this. This is not, I'm not being forced to accept this.
And the nice thing is that it didn't come from God.
Yeah, right.
You granted yourself the serenity to accept the things that you cannot change. You developed yourself the courage to change the things that you can. And you are working, as we all are, always on the wisdom to know the difference.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, we love to hear from you. If you have any comments, questions, again, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram searching for A Codependent Mind.
We appreciate likes and reviews and follows on the podcast platform of your choice. And we hope you'll join us in a couple of weeks.